Welcome back to our debrief, our comfy chair after the main episode where we get to poke fun at the timeline, shake loose the extra weirdness, and admit out loud that time is basically just a group project with no manager. Now, in the main episode, we talked about losing days, how our calendars got patched, how New Year's Day used to be a moving target, how one government can literally just say, oh, those dates don't happen, and how the modern world can still eat a day if you stand on the wrong side of the international dateline. But today, I want to zoom in on one of the most famous annual time rituals here on Earth, the Times Square ball drop. Because it's easy to treat it like just background noise, like it's always been there, like the ball is just a sparkly disco fruit that descends from the sky to remind us that we still have no idea who put up these decorations. But the ball drop is actually a fossil of an older technology, one that used to keep ships from getting lost at sea. It's the ghost of navigation dressed up like a party. So put down your party hats, drink the last of that champagne, and let's get on into it, shall we? Now, before Times Square, dropping a ball wasn't a celebration, it was a tool. Now, here's the problem historically. If you're a ship captain, you can figure out your latitude pretty well. Stars, sun height, that kind of thing. But longitude, well, longitude is the evil level. Longitude is, I hope you brought a clock and one that doesn't lie. A marine chronometer, an accurate clock, lets you compare your local solar time to a known reference time, and that difference tells you your longitude. But only if that clock is correct, and ships are basically floating machines designed to shake things loose, rust everything, and ruin your confidence. So ports started offering a public time signal, the time ball. Now, the name itself is as fanciful as you would imagine, but it was literally just a big visible ball on a mast. Every day it would get raised, and then at an exact agreed moment, it would drop. And when it starts to drop, that is your now. That is when you set your clock. That is your calibration. One of the most famous early examples, the Greenwich time ball in London, it starts rising just before the drop, halfway up, then all the way up, and then it falls exactly at 1 p.m., a daily synchronize your life moment that is still performed today, weather permitting. And it dates all the way back to the 1830s. That's not a party trick. That is timekeeping as theater. And Greenwich wasn't alone. Time balls showed up across ports worldwide, the Cape of Good Hope, Jakarta, Valparaiso, Mauritius, New Zealand, because if ships can't trust time, ships can't trust maps. And if ships can't trust maps, well, empires start to get really stressed. Now keep that image, a ball falling at a precise moment so that strangers can agree that now is now. That right there is the DNA of Times Square. Now, Times Square wasn't always Times Square. In 1904, it's still basically Longacre Square, and the New York Times moves into its new headquarters building, or what becomes One Times Square. The publisher, Adolph Ochs, was like, oh, cool, we're going to brand this intersection. So he lobbies the city successfully to rename the area to Times Square, and then he throws a New Year's Eve celebration to match the ambition. Street festival energy, fireworks, the whole deal, and it is a hit. Times Square becomes the place to ring in the new year. But then 2 years later, the problem occurs. The city bans fireworks because of safety concerns or crowd concerns or the general vibe of maybe we shouldn't rain fire over a tightly packed human rectangle. So, Ox has a dilemma. How do you announce the new year without fireworks? And the answer is very simple. To the New York Times, you replace the sky explosion with a mechanical spectacle that makes the building itself the headline. So, to get to work on this and solve the fireworks ban problem, Ox turns to the Times' chief electrician, Walter Palmer, and basically says, hey, invent a new tradition. No pressure. Palmer takes inspiration from an older New York timekeeping signal, a time ball that used to drop from the Western Union building in the late 1800s, triggered by an observatory time signal, very similar to the same concept in Greenwich, but with a very particular New York flavoring. So they end up building one. And this first ball is not the modern crystal spaceship that we have today. It is basically an industrial orb. It's about 5 feet in diameter, made of iron, wood, and lit with 25-watt light bulbs. It's the original version of a glow-up. And that's the key twist. This isn't just a party, it is an old timekeeping idea reborn as a public ritual. A time ball meant synchronize your instruments. A New Year's ball means synchronize your feelings. It's the same mechanism, a shared now, but with a different purpose. It's like taking a maritime navigational tool and turning it into a national mood ring. Now, over time, the ball drop stops being a local spectacle and becomes a broadcast rite. This moment when huge numbers of people agree to stop doing everything else and watch a minute of descending glitter. And here's the part that I love. It is the opposite of the calendar chaos we talked about in the main episode. The calendar reforms, like Britain's missing days, fracture people's sense of time. They create confusion, and it creates paperwork panic. But the ball drop is a time unifier. It's a mass, okay, ready? Moment. And it's not alone, because the drop a thing at midnight tradition mutates everywhere. Some places do balls, some places drop local symbols, other places do anything as long as it falls in a dramatic way and hopefully doesn't hit a spectator. And that's the same pattern as time zones and calendars. Time isn't just measured, it's performed, and the performance helps us agree. So if we zoom out from Times Square, the older global ball drop network is the same time ball system itself. We've got Greenwich still doing its daily drop. We've got ports around the world historically using time balls so ships could rate chronometers. The Cape of Good Hope to New Zealand, all the way in between. So the funny truth is, the Times Square ball is a celebrity descendant of a whole family of working class industrial, please set your clock correctly, or Diet C, ball drops. Which means the ball drop is secretly the most glamorized safety procedure in history. Now, going from the ball drop to ring in the new year, we have some dates that ring upon this week in history. On January 5th, we see the Golden Gate Bridge construction beginning in 1933. They break ground on what would become the Golden Gate Bridge in the depths of the Great Depression. It's one of those build the future anyway moments, essentially serving as engineering as morale. In 1925, Nellie Taylor Ross takes office in Wyoming, becoming the first woman to serve as a governor of a U.S. state. A politics milestone that still feels weirdly modern when you remember how recent it is. On January 6, 1912, we see New Mexico becoming the 47th U.S. state. From turquoise rocks and jewelry to turquoise meth, New Mexico has had a story all of its own. On January 7th of 1610, Galileo looks at Jupiter and realizes the little stars near it are moving, meaning they're not stars. What he's seeing are moons, worlds orbiting something other than Earth, evidence that the universe does not, in fact, revolve around our ego. On January 8, 1815, the Battle of New Orleans, an American victory in the War of 1812 fought after the peace treaty had already been signed, because at this point transatlantic communication was slow, and history loves its irony. Speaking of irony, on January 10th of 1920, the League of Nations officially comes into existence. It was an early attempt to build a system for international peace and cooperation after World War I. A big idea, but an imperfect execution, and a direct ancestor to the kind of global institutions we still argue about today. And finally, on January 11th of 1922, Leonard Thompson becomes the first person to receive an insulin injection as a treatment for diabetes. One of those medical breakthroughs that flips a story from death sentence to manageable life and changes the 20th century in a single clinical moment. Now, going from this week in history into our second segment for Debrief, Y2K, the Millennium Bug, and the non-apocalypse. So Y2K wasn't computers are dumb. Y2K was more of a humans are practical until practicality becomes a trap. A huge number of systems stored years with just 2 digits, 97 instead of 1997. Why? Well, because early computing culture was obsessed with efficiency. Storage was expensive and data files were tight, so shaving characters off records saved real money and capacity. The shortcut worked fine as long as your century never changed. Then, as the year 2000 approaches and 00 becomes a very real logical landmine, saying, is it 1900? Is it 2000? It's a no year. And if your system compares dates, sorts them, calculates duration, schedules tasks, suddenly the future can look exactly like the distant past. So the fear wasn't every computer will explode at midnight. The fear was a silent, cascading effect of logical failures in billing, in payroll, inventory, scheduling, aviation, banking, utilities, everywhere, anywhere that dates mattered. Now here's what made Y2K uniquely scary. It wasn't one bug in one product. It was a category of bug across decades of code, across industries, and across borders. And it wasn't just software on desktops. People worried about embedded systems, the little computers inside of equipment, because those don't show you a blue screen, they just break. So governments and agencies did audits and readiness work precisely because so many critical systems had hidden date logic. Now, Y2K didn't have to strike exactly at midnight. Some systems only touched dates on specific events, such as end-of-month processing, end-of-year interest calculations, certificate expirations, or leap day handling. So even if midnight goes fine, you could still get a hit on January 2nd, or the 31st, or leap day. And the reason that January 1st, 2000 didn't become a techno-apocalypse is simple. People saw it coming, and they worked like demons. In the United States, for example, the federal government formed the President's Council on Year 2000 Conversion, with Josh Krasinkin as chair, coordinating readiness and pushing agencies and sectors to test and remediate any dangerous options. Financial regulators were publicly tracking readiness too, because the banks who did a whoopsie with dates is not a vibe that you want. And globally, estimates for remediation costs were enormous. For example, a Federal Reserve testimony cited Gartner estimates of $300 to $600 billion worldwide for Y2K remediation. A real money, real manpower, real rewrite action. Reuters later summarized estimates such as IDC's calculations of U.S. costs and a worldwide pre-millennium spend figure on the order of the hundreds of billions. The Y2K was the planet's biggest group project, and for once, the group carried the grade. Now, one of my favorite under-discussed parts is the act of testing for Y2K sometimes itself caused serious disruptions, not because the world hit 2000, but because humans were trying to simulate it. A widely reported example of a Y2K test incident at a nuclear plant in 1999 where a date change mistake during testing caused the systems to crash, underscoring just how messy it could get when you bring future dates into live environments. That's not the apocalypse, that's just the rehearsal accidentally knocking over the set. So all of this preparation, all of this worry, what actually happens when midnight hits? Well, mostly minor issues. And that's not me downplaying it, that's the official wrap-ups and what they emphasize. Problems did exist, but they were generally so small and so quickly fixed that they were nowhere near the worst fears of the governments around the world. The U.S. Senate Special Committee's final report, titled Crisis Averted, documented examples like transportation system glitches that were resolved quickly, the FAA systems with issues, display equipment showing 1900, and other hiccups that didn't cascade into a catastrophe. So why do people argue about Y2K to this very day? Well, because success creates a paradox. If you prevent a disaster, it can look a lot like that disaster was never real. Very similar to how I actually got rid of all the vampires in the world. So you've never had to deal with any vampires throughout your life. You're welcome. Now, some people later framed Y2K as hype. Others, especially the engineers who did the work, argue that it was real risk that got mitigated by extraordinary effort, and that the non-event is the proof that the fixes worked. Retrospectives still reflect that tension. It was a mass panic, but also a mass successful intervention. Y2K is basically the world's biggest "you're welcome," delivered in complete silence. And here's where we're able to tie it all back. Calendars are fragile when politics and astronomy don't line up. But modern life is fragile when software assumes that the future will behave like the past. Y2K was a warning label we ignored until the font got big enough to read it from space. And if you want one final kicker before we leave, Y2K wasn't the last date bug. Any time systems make assumptions about ranges, years, time zones, leap days. You get a new cliff out there in the fog. Not an apocalypse, just perpetual maintenance. Time isn't discovered, it's just supported. So that is your debrief truth. The Times Square ball drop isn't just a party, it's a transformed piece of old technology, a time signal turned into a cultural heartbeat. We used to drop balls so ships wouldn't drift off course, so now we drop a ball so we don't drift, socially, emotionally, spiritually, into the next year without a shared moment to mark it. And the next time someone says time is made up, you can say, yeah, so is the ball drop, and that still works. Next time on Naked History, we're pulling back the curtain on secret societies, the Illuminati, the Freemasons, the shadowy groups everyone swears are running the world. We'll be separating the rituals from the rumors, the real history from the internet lore, and ask a harder question. Why do we keep needing hidden villains to explain very visible problems? Because once you strip away the symbols and whispered oaths, what's left isn't a master plan. It's fear, imagination, and a long tradition of blaming the unknown instead of facing the truth. So, if you liked this and are excited for the next episode, hit follow, leave a rating, and tell me your best New Year's time betrayal story. If you missed a countdown, maybe you were in the wrong time zone, or a watch that confidently insisted that it was 2003 for 6 straight months, drop it in the comments or send it in. I want chaos for 2026. I feed on it. But until then, I hope you guys have a wonderful new year. Thank you for sticking with me with everything that's been happening over the holidays, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. I know I can't, and neither can the people in my walls. But until then, I've been Dylan Gasaway, and this has been Naked History Debrief. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.